Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The British economy today faces three key challenges. We have, firstly, low productivity with the associated wage stagnation that comes with that and, of course, the reduced tax receipts. We have high public sector debt, and we must recognise the constraints that that places on what is possible economically, and we have to be honest about some of the hard choices that need to be made. And thirdly, there is Brexit, as has already been called the elephant in the room. The uncertainty that it is creating for businesses and investment in the country, the impact on our economy, and indeed also the opportunity cost of all of the energy and the money that is being spent on preparing for Brexit that could otherwise be directed elsewhere. Now, the Chancellor is a serious man. We had our differences in coalition, significant differences, but in recent months he has appeared to be one of the few voices in the Cabinet of reason on Brexit. But he had an unenviable task coming to the House today. In a picture where there is higher inflation, lower growth, lower productivity and high levels of debt, it really is bleak. The economy will be £45 billion smaller in 2021 than had been projected just in March of this year. And so I'm afraid his attempts to paint a cheerful vision of the future were rather less successful than his jokes. The truth is, as the Chancellor knows, this budget and the next budget and the budget after that and all the future budgets are made all the more difficult because of Brexit and because of the extreme approach to Brexit that this government is pursuing. By making clear that an exit from the single market and the customs union is a red line for the government, and of course this is aided and abetted by the front bench of the Labour Party, this imperils the future of the UK economy, and the Chancellor knows it. The Right Honourable Member for Loughborough said that there is no pot of gold at the end of the Brexit rainbow. She is right, although I think the metaphor that would be more appropriate is that of a thunderstorm than a rainbow. The cost of Brexit preparations, we learned today, are not just the £700 million already allocated, but a further £3 billion, more than the extra money that could be found for the NHS, which tells its own story, Madam Deputy Speaker. But you add on top of that the exit bill, which will be, who knows, £20 billion, £30 billion, £40 billion, plus the overall hit to the economy, which the OECD has suggested could be £40 billion. And it is no surprise that these figures were not stuck on the side of a bus in the referendum campaign. Now, to promote the health of our economy, we have long needed to use the advantage of low borrowing rates to increase investment in the economy. And so I welcome some of the measures that have been set out today to unlock new house building. But it is not ambitious enough. As ever in budgets, the devil is in the detail. The headline figure touted was £44 billion. Only £15 billion of that was actually news, and just £6 billion of that was extra for increasing housing supply. And as my honourable friend, the member for Bath, said, next to no help for extra social housing, which is of course badly needed as part of the mix. On the NHS, Simon Stevens had asked for £4 billion next year. The Chancellor's response does not come close. The new revenue peaks at £1.9 billion next year and then drops to £1.1 billion. As I say, we appreciate on these benches that hard choices do need to be made, and if we want to resource our NHS and social care properly, we do need to look at how to find the funds, and that's why we have proposed an increase in income tax of 1 penny in the pound, specifically for the NHS and social care. And worth noting, social care is something which the Chancellor did not even think worth mentioning in his remarks.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
I certainly will.
I thank her for giving way. I wonder whether she's done the calculation of what £350 million a week for the NHS over a year would amount to. I think the figure is £18 billion. How much is the Chancellor offering?
Well, next year £1.9 billion, so he has fallen significantly short of that. But I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will be, no doubt, beating a path to his door to try to make that bus happen, or perhaps not. On social care, we need serious responses and serious cross-party work to find long-term solutions instead of the half-baked policies cooked up in secret that the government offered at the last election. On taxation, in addition to that increase in income tax that my party has suggested to fund the NHS, there was a missed opportunity to increase capital gains tax, to increase corporation tax. Instead of this race to the bottom of trying to get to 17%, we instead could keep it at a competitive rate of 20% and get the additional funds that would generate. Now, the Chancellor was right to say that international action is needed to create fairer taxation, but he failed to address the role of the overseas territories. We should require them to comply with UK standards on transparency or be prevented from doing business in the UK for companies that are registered there. And in the spirit of being transparent, I ought to be transparent about the fact that my husband works for Transparency International UK. In the context of rocketing executive pay, it is impossible to escape the contrasts between the rich, who can hide their assets and avoid tax, those on middle incomes in public and private sectors who are facing real terms pay cuts, and the poor, many of whom, whether they are working or not, rely on benefits to make ends meet. Now, it has been mentioned by the member for Roscoe and Lochaber, the £12 billion in cuts to benefits still to come, £12 billion of cuts which Liberal Democrats blocked in the coalition. And of course, the rise in the income tax threshold, while welcome, is in contrast to the continued freeze in benefits. Now, that was bad enough last year or the year before, but in the face of a 3% inflation level, that is going to cause real hardship. We see some changes to universal credit, but the wider problems have been ignored, and not least the £3 billion of cuts that were introduced in 2015. Universal credit needs to be paused while these problems are ironed out. There's a merit in a simpler system, but basically using a new system to just make deep cuts fools no one and undermines the important principles that underlie universal credit. On the environment, I welcome the consideration of new charges on single-use plastics, a Lib Dem idea, but there is precious little else to demonstrate the government appreciates the scale of the climate threat we face. They've already scrapped rules for zero-carbon homes, cut subsidies for solar and renewable heat, privatised the Green Investment Bank and scrapped the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And yet today we did not see any new resource for tidal, waste from energy, carbon capture and storage. They do not have a strong record on the environment. But on a positive note, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will welcome a couple of things in the budget. I welcome the investment in technology, in artificial intelligence, driverless cars and geospatial data. And I was going to make the point that ethics need to be at the heart of how we proceed. And whether we can do something is not the same as whether we should do something. And so I was delighted to read on page 45 of the Red Book that the Government does intend to establish a Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. This is urgently needed, and we should lead the way on this issue. And so I say on that issue, well done to the Government, and I look forward to exploring in more detail with Ministers those issues in future. I also welcome the National Retraining Scheme, in particular the partnership with both the CBI and the TUC to make that work, with the focus on digital and construction skills in the first instance. But I would also say, particularly in the context of the automation challenge we face to our workforce, we should be looking more at the care sector. There are certain things that robots will not be able to do in the near or indeed distant future, and caring and human empathy is one of those things. We also face a demographic time bomb, and so we need to be upskilling and investing in the care sector to change it from a low-status profession to one which we should recognise is one which is high skill, and we should be making sure there is proper resource there. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, our country faces big challenges and opportunities. There is a bleak economic outlook, low productivity. We have the threat of climate change. There is the pace of technological change and the impact of automation on work. These challenges are enough to keep any government awake at night. They need attention, they need innovation, and they need new ideas. Instead, we have a government obsessed and consumed by Brexit, and it is not even doing that competently. The economic picture outlined by the Chancellor today makes it clearer than ever that we need an exit from Brexit.